with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, a very, very, very busy week. You know, we're going to have a big discussion today on supply chain. I mean, that is really an amazing mess. It's a mess, and I think it's much more complicated than our president and this administration really seems to understand. You know, and all the facets of why this is happening, right? It's not that if you have 24/7, you know, some people working at the ports and so forth. It's so much bigger than that. It's equipment. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the truck drivers. We don't have the chassis. We got to reposition containers from the United States sitting here empty back to Asia so they can come to the be filled and come back to the United States. There's just a lack of containers to ship this product, and then you got the ports congested. And, you know, how many containers are sitting out there right now?
1 million. As of yesterday, 1 million TEUs are offshore right now.
Right.
1 million.
It's
amazing.
And a TEU is about half the size of one of these big tractor trailer trucks that you see. And so that's 500,000 tractor trailer trucks. So all these big container ships, container trucks you see driving around a road, that's 500,000 trucks worth sitting to be unloaded. And so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to have Nick Vyas on, and he's from the University of Southern California, and he's the head of their supply chain department. I mean, really, really
well, wait a minute.
guest.
He's in University of Southern California. He could get right over to Long Beach. What's wrong with him?
Well,
they need him.
I want to hear what he has to say.
Put those gloves on, Nick.
Because, you know, that's the largest port in our country. So if we can figure that out,
you know what's amazing with these ports? Do we know ports well? You and I have been in the District Export Council in South Florida. The ports don't close. I don't want to say anything, but Port Miami doesn't close. They actually function.
It's a 24-hour.
Airports, last I looked,
7-day week.
FedEx does all their stuff at night. So this is going to be an exciting conversation to have.
But, you know, let's talk about the debt ceiling.
Oh, my God.
Let's talk about spending.
Yeah.
Let's talk about taxes.
Yeah.
Because that's the other incredible thing that's going on in our country. And God, man, this could really, really be another massive mess. It already is a massive mess. But especially if some of these policies pass Congress, and it's just hanging on a thread right now. Our country's hanging on a thread. We're really pleased to have with us Wayne Cruz, who's the policy director at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Wayne, welcome back to Made in America.
You betcha. Thank you guys for having me. It's terrific to be with you again.
Well, we're going to start off by listening to President Biden blame President Trump for all the tax and spending policies that he inherited. Let's listen to what the president said this week.
The reason we have to raise the debt limit is in part because of the reckless tax and spending policies under the previous Trump administration. In 4 years, they incurred nearly $8 trillion. In 4 years, $8 trillion in additional debt.
So, I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, and what, 6 trillion, 7 trillion was because of the pandemic. I mean, which was obviously a Mayday situation going on in our country.
Which, of course, he conveniently left out.
Which had broad bipartisan support for that. That's so right. That's not what we're talking about with what Biden wants to do. This was a pandemic of historic proportions. It never happened before.
Yeah, the pandemic, you guys, was the third big crisis that we've had in the 21st century. And you're certainly correct that the big thing that occurred was you got bipartisan support immediately. And I remember it very, very explicitly from Mitch McConnell. You got a lot of bipartisan support for jumping out spending, starting new programs, saying that the federal government is going to do all it can. So all of that was on Trump's watch, and you got a lot of spending under Trump. Remember, a lot of the spending and and action was regulatory in nature too, because we had things, the moratoria, the rent moratoria and things of that sort, new family leave programs that were put into place during the pandemic, even before the CARES Act passed. So you had a massive, massive expansion of federal spending under Trump because of the pandemic. And remember, at the end of 2020, about a year ago now, in fact, Trump was wanting to spend more and send out bigger checks than the Democrats. You might remember that fight. Nancy Pelosi had a check amount in mind, and Trump was going to send even more. So you can appreciate the politics of all of that, but it's disingenuous for Biden now to say that the debt and the reason we have to do the debt limit increase is because of Trump, because the progressives certainly would have done far more. There were several progressive reform bills that were in play last year that never got enacted, by which the Democrats wanted to do far more of this social spending. And, they have a bunch of names for it. Biden calls it Build Back Better, and he's stuck with that term from his campaign till now. But there's also, internationally, they call this reset. There are all sorts of words for it. But the progressives are treating everything as crisis now. And they want to, the climate is a crisis, and we need to do emergency action on climate next once we're done with the pandemic. And so they'll keep the spigots open. And I have to say, to me, and I think this is obvious to a lot of people, but to me, it's very clear that they want to get the able-bodied adult middle class hooked on government payments every month. And you can see that in the things that were enacted during the pandemic. You can see it in what's being proposed now in Build Back Better. They call this human engineering now. Human infrastructure now.
Yeah.
Normal infrastructure.
Never heard of that one before, but it sounds good.
Normal infrastructure benefits humans, but when you call something human infrastructure, you're kind of leaking out that you're really looking for control. That's what they're doing, and that's why I would have to say, and I had done a piece in Forbes about this last week, but this week I was addressing in Forbes I think we need an Abuse of Crisis Prevention Act. We've got to have a major piece of legislation to put the brakes on and punish progressive overreaction to crises and exploitation of crises. But as far as that debt limit itself, I'd have to say right now, guys, I would oppose any debt limit increase, because you know what this is really doing. What it's doing is it's setting the clock back to zero for the Biden administration to go forth and do Build Back Better, because they can't do it if they're snapped shut right now.
But Rich, on this,
we're not going to default. We're not going to default because I'll just say this. Then I'll be quiet. But they're not going to default because it's a very simple thing to make sure that we do the interest payments on the debt, which are the key thing. And beyond that, you've got entitlements that people have counted on and things like that. But 2 years ago, we had a government shutdown and nobody noticed. And so I think
nobody noticed except that when Obama was threatening that he'd cut out Social Security payment, he scared the hell out of the older population that he was going to do that. But you're right.
That's right. But that's not what anybody's going to do. And see,
exactly.
That's what they're counting on. That's what they're counting on. They're scaring the public with this debt ceiling threat. And I may be back on your show in a month talking about this again when they're doing this in December, because right now they've done about a 400 to 500 billion bump in the debt limit amount. So that allegedly gives some breathing space until early December. But what McConnell has done, I thought it was a bad idea for him to do it, but what he sees it as strategic. I don't really see it that way, but he sees bumping it to early December when they also have to address the government itself running out of money, which is different from the debt limit issue itself. He thinks that's going to put the Democrats in a box where they have to do something. But of course, they've said that they're not going to attach the debt limit increase to the reconciliation, which is Republicans are demanding that the Democrats do it themselves. Just put it that way. Rich, put it in a reconciliation.
Right. Hey, Wayne, I want to get Rich in on this. So, Rich, what McConnell has got kind of beat up a lot, right? He's got beat up by President Trump and some others. Oh, he caved in. But I don't get it, because I think Wayne said it right, is that he increased the debt ceiling just enough to pay the basic stuff, but he didn't for all of these spending initiatives. I mean, that's off the table. They can't use this debt ceiling increase to jam through any of these socialist programs, and he put the Democrats in a box. Rich, what do you think about that?
Yeah, he did do that. But remember, and we've had a number of senators and congressmen outtakes on the show over the last few weeks. They said, "Why do you care where we vote? You don't need us. You don't need us for any of this. You control the House. You can control the Senate. You've got the presidency. You want to pass this. You want to raise the debt limit. You want to raise the taxes. You want to increase all these regulations. You want to take this country down a road. You're not going to get it with one Republican vote."
And Wayne, that's a good place that we need to end it. But and that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about is all of the supply chain problem, because we don't have people that's working, and that's because we're turning into a socialist country where it's just you don't have to work and you still live a great life and you don't have to be productive. Wayne, thanks for being on the show. You've been a great guest. Wayne Cruz, Policy Director at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Wayne, we'll see you again soon.
Sure, thank you.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman are going to talk about the supply chain issue that's impacting all of us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, we're going to be talking a lot about supply chain here in just a moment. But to kind of put some closure on what we were just talking about with Wayne, there's a great clip this week from Laura Ingraham. Let's listen to that.
And get this, the feds took in record amount in tax revenues last fiscal year, but now they want to raise your taxes because the monster always has to be fed. They took in $4 trillion.
So, Rich, I don't think that people realize.
No, they have no idea.
With the Trump tax cuts, they've actually collected more in taxes.
That's what Reagan said.
Right? I mean, that's
exactly it.
So they had an historic year of collections in taxes, right? And that's when President Trump would have been president. And it's because he got the economy moving. There were more people working. What are they doing? They're paying their taxes. There's more small businesses doing business. There's more entrepreneurs investing. There's more inventors inventing. All of that is happening because there's a huge incentive to do so. And therefore, people are paying more taxes.
Well, yeah, it's exactly right. He said the whole philosophy behind the Trump tax cuts and relaxation of regulations. I almost got lost in the word in that one. Relaxation of regulations. That it just freed up the economy. See, the economy it's like a stallion. It wants to get out of that, corral and just go for it. And it will do that. And Trump proved that. Because once he took those all those regulations that they had from the Obama administration, and all the taxes that were there, and he lowered the taxes to have people repatriate money and come back to this country, lowering the corporate tax rate, individual tax rate, tax credits, not handouts, tax credits based upon income and so forth. You have to work to file to get your credit. It made so much sense. And all of us benefited by that. And the point of the matter is, the way it's going now, $4 trillion is huge. Why do we need a tax increase? Why do we have to have any of this right now? Why do we need $3.5 trillion or $2.2 trillion or $1.2 trillion? It is just astounding because it will carry itself.
That's right. So, imagine that if we collected $4 trillion, it's historic. And if you want to spend another $3.5 trillion, it means you have to double your tax collections. I mean, they're going to be taxing the corporations, our small businesses, our entrepreneurs until there are no more. They'll be gone because they can't survive. And so then who are you going to tax? Well, there's nobody to tax anymore. So then you're just printing money, and then therefore you're debasing your currency and everybody's life savings. And
that's Venezuela.
Well,
typical socialist country.
And you could look at a lot of countries like that. I mean, so you don't have to look far to see the result of that policy.
Well, you can see the handwriting on the wall. I mean, you're looking at this country right now as a result of all these out of control scenarios, and we are starting to look like a third world country. I mean, we have fights at Board of Education, meetings. I've never seen that in my entire life, ever. And I used to attend these things. I'm nuts. I used to go to these meetings. And they were kind of nice. You listened, you talked, you found out. And then you got cookies and stuff like that at the end. It was great. But you don't do that anymore. Now you go there and it's like Friday night fights. Well, and that's insane. Our border's out of control. We're telling people they can't work if they don't have because of mandates across the board, whether it's a facial mandate or it's going to be the vaccination mandate. Now they're saying, and this is going to affect going forward with the economy, if you do not get your booster shot, they will wipe out the other 2 shots, and you are of the unvaccinated. I mean, this is turning into a Stephen King novel. The unvaccinated. You are becoming the unwanted. You're the body snatcher. You can't be part of the mainstream world anymore. So we are heading in such a weird place right now with shortages, inability to buy product, and ability to make product. I mean, it's very much out of whack. So the taxation we're talking about only makes it that much worse.
So, yeah, let's talk about supply chain, because that's really a big issue. And I'd like to
just
use my own experience. And my own experience is I'm a factory. I manufacture things. I got 5 factories. And, we import because we have to, because materials, components, different things that we need to build our products are not available. And they're certainly not available at the prices that we need to buy them at to remain competitive. And like other many millions of American manufacturers, we rely on global supply chains. I mean, take a look at the auto industry. I mean, they're not getting chips right now. They can't build cars in this country. I went to a dealership recently. My wife, I've always leased cars, and her lease was up. She was very excited. She's going to get another car. We get there, and every car in the showroom is used. It's used cars. They have no new cars to sell.
No, they have nothing. I'm in the same boat.
They have new cars to sell. So it's new cars. So, the first time ever I bought a car off the lease. It was worth $20,000 more than the residual value on the lease, just because used cars are so expensive. I mean, this is a real problem. You talk about inflation. Someone asked us the other day, who's going to pay for this? Let me tell you who's going to pay for it. It's the American consumer is going to pay for it.
We all are.
Our families are going to pay for it. Our friends are going to pay for it. Our neighbors are going to pay for it because of inflation, because this global supply chain mess that's been created. And the president said the other day, and we'll play this clip. We just got to go here in a second. That everyone's going to work 24/7. It's not that easy. That's not the problem. We have no chassis in this country. In other words, once a container comes off of a ship, you got to put it on that frame with the wheels. Rich, this is a big problem. We're going to have on with us just in a moment Nick Vyas from the University of Southern California, and he's executive director of their supply chain program. Very important guy, really on top of this stuff. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Hey, Rich, we got an incredible guest right now. We promised a lot of discussion today on supply chain and what does that mean. What does it mean for Christmas? What does it mean for inflation? We're
what does it mean for your weekend barbecue?
Yeah,
bring it home.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and by the way, I've seen this happening as an American manufacturer. I've seen this happening for the last several months, and nobody was talking about it. And like now, all of a sudden, it's happened. No, this hasn't all of a sudden happened. This has been around for a while, and now the media is paying attention because it's becoming very, very severe. But this has been happening for a long time. We're very pleased to have with us Nick Vyas. He is the executive director at the Global Supply Chain, at the Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute at USC, the University of Southern California. Nick, welcome to Made in America.
Glad to be here.
So what do you make about what's going on? We heard President Biden say, we're going to work 24/7 and so on and so forth. But the problem is really a lot bigger than that. I mean, it's not only a U.S. problem, it's a global problem. And we don't control everything that needs to be controlled here.
Absolutely. I think you said it well. I think it's a global problem, right? The crisis in supply chain is not just domestic supply chains are on fire, but rather it's a global disruption. So I think the question that you asked, I think we need to ask that question: how did we get here? Right? So this is not the phenomena that we can blame COVID. The structural deficiencies of our supply chains were there before COVID. Right? It's been 40 years in making. And this goes to both sides of the aisle. I think what I call the Western democracies, the leaders for the last 4 years, we fell asleep behind the wheel, where the supply chain slowly but surely became very long, very one country centric, and only cost focused. And in doing so, we really ignored the fact that they're not going to be resilient. Not only not resilient for the pandemic that we might be exposed to, such as COVID, but also any geopolitical tension. So I think this was long-term in making, and unfortunately, the COVID exposed the structural deficiencies across the globe.
Well, I think you're right. This has been a long time coming. It is not quite as well. It's not even close to being as simplistic as the president has mentioned and pointed out. And the nuances of getting it back together just don't happen overnight. But I certainly, and I agree with Neil, and I agree with what you agreed with earlier. So we're all in agreement. Glad to hear that. Just having a port work 24/7, which most do anyway, isn't the answer. Telling people and telling the private corporations, well, if you don't go along with this, we're going to call you. That's not going to be the answer either. This isn't, a lecture that has to be given. You have to understand how a product is produced and how it gets shipped and how it gets together. And the timing of all of this is crucial. So this is very, very important. And Neil, if we don't get some very strong leadership on this, I have to ask the question, and I got to put it out to everyone: where is our Secretary of Transportation, and where has he been on this? Why are we suddenly, the last minute, saying I've got a solution and we're going to make these people work 24/7? To me, it's like putting a Band-Aid on the dam that's leaking and about to just explode.
So, Nick, is that the solution? It's not that simple, is it?
Well, yeah, so let's actually look at these things, right? I think the steps in terms of opening up the throughput capacity, because remember, the port is run by very influential labor union, and getting the buy-in to really create a 40% additional capacity is a step in the right direction. Do I think that's a magic bullet that will solve all our problems? And the answer is absolutely not. Is this a good thing to do, at least now, to start to flow things so we can have vessels dwell for a week at a time in numbers up to 60, 70s a day? I think this might be a good step in the right direction, but this is not the solution. I think long-term, we need to look at it. And I look at this as a citizen, and we as a consumer, and we as American citizens, we need to look at it. How do we come together as a one country and build the infrastructure, not today, not for tomorrow, but for next 30, 40, 50 years, that we become the best-in-class supply chain infrastructure provider, both physically and digitally, so that when we make the call to our companies, say, decouple your supply chain and come close to home or come at home, they have something to fall back to it. Because
but Nick, the problem there is that, all the regulation and the taxation that we have in our country and just the cost of everything in our country, it's just so expensive to operate here. A lot of our companies have gone overseas, not because they want to, but we feel it's survival. They have to. We're talking about just resetting the entire American market. And with all of the special interests and all of that, I don't know how you do it. How do you bring this stuff back here?
I know. Neil, you bring up a very good point, right? We need to remove the frictions. We need to remove the bureaucracy. We need to create a seamless experience for the manufacturers to come home to. So it's a holistic approach we need to take. We need to come to agreement to operate from that framework, to provide them the best infrastructure, best policies, guidance, and create that incentive so the resiliency of our supply chains are much better protected. Because remember, geopolitical tensions could disrupt the supply chain even worse if we don't change today.
Yes, and we could have spent a whole nother segment talking about China and all the problems they're having, shutting down plants because they have no electricity, they got no coal, and you're right, we're exposed to all that, and we just can't move. It takes 25, 30 years, a generation to put this stuff into place. It's a big mess. Hey, Nick, unfortunately, we're out of time. We've been together with Nick Vyas, who is the executive director at the Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute at USC. Nick, thanks for being on the show. Coming up, Dr. Rich and I have a lot more to talk about on this topic.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Rich, as I said at the beginning, we're going to talk a lot about supply chain. And boy, is there a lot to talk about. And we're going to listen to a couple of sound bites. I want to get your thoughts on this. From Bob Nardelli this week. And he's the former CEO of Home Depot and Chrysler. So obviously he knows a lot about supply chains.
He knows how to put something together, doesn't he?
Yes.
Lots of parts.
And he understands the way that materials flow around the world, both in raw materials and components and also in finished goods. So let's listen to what Bob had to say here this week.
It doesn't solve the problem by telling people buy early for Christmas. It doesn't solve the problem tell people to go buy a chest freezer and stock up on meat and poultry. We're out now tin cupping for oil when we had reached energy independence. I mean, it just challenges common sense.
Well, I have one thing to say there that I disagree with about chest freezers. I manufacture chest freezers, so I hope everybody buys chest freezers. They're really good to have. But no, I get the point that, you know, you got to go and stockpile. It's kind of like we're all going to be doomsday preppers here. You know, we're all doomsday preppers here because we got to store all this stuff up now because the whole supply chain has fallen apart. Where's Biden in this? Where's the Secretary of Transportation in all of this?
Buttigieg.
They're lost.
Yeah.
They're no-shows.
Yeah.
They're absolutely no-shows. And, you know, it's a big problem. Hey, look, you know, I import a lot of components and raw materials from China for my factories. And there's a whole other thing that's come out of this this last week. Think about how complicated this is and how crazy it is. We heard how President Biden earlier had a soundbite about how everybody's going to work 24 hours. This is far bigger than that. This is so much bigger than that. In China, they're closing their factories down 2 days a week, many of the factories in 2 days a week, especially in the industrial zones. Why? Because they don't have any electric. They're running out of electric there. Why? Because they don't have any coal. And why don't they have coal? Because they cut off all coal imports from Australia, and that's their main source. Talk about, you know, shooting yourself in the foot, cutting your nose off to spite your face, because of this submarine, the nuclear submarine deal that Australia did with the United States. So in retaliation, we're not going to buy your coal. So therefore, in China, they don't have electricity. And talk about, you know, China saying about, oh, you know, they're going to be climate change and all this kind of stuff. Let me tell you, they don't only burn coal, they burn coal in very old, antiquated 1950s type of electrical generation facilities that is very dirty, very polluting. But now they're shutting them down because they're punishing Australia. You know, so does our government understand the complexities that they're dealing with here?
In simple answer, very short, succinct, to the point, no. Obviously not. Biden, I mean, I was listening to Biden. He gave the speech this week, and he was talking about what supply chain is all about. He says, well, you build, I mean, I thought it was Peter Sellers out of being there. You build things, and you put them into these containers, and you ship the containers, and the containers have to go to a port, and at the port, the containers get unshipped. You know, they get, emptied, and they get placed on trucks, and the trucks go to the warehouses, and from the warehouses it goes to the... He's trying to explain all this stuff. And I'm watching, people are taking notes on this. And it's like, who needs a note on this? This is so simplistic, it's ridiculous. Here's the difference, and this is where I take away on all of this. When Trump came in, he put his administration together, Neil. You may have noticed he had a lot of people who were billionaires, millionaires, very successful businessmen and women. People who knew how to run a business. Now, why is that? Because the United States is the biggest business in the world. That's what we are. We are a huge mega business. You need somebody who understands the nuances of business and how to make it work. Now you have Joe Biden. In the best of Joe Biden's days, before he lost his mind, before he lost his ability with arteriosclerosis that he can walk down in the Rose Garden without getting lost. I mean, before all of that, Joe had no idea what he's doing with this anyway, because he never did anything. What did he do? He became a candidate, and he became a congressman. He became a senator. He did all this stuff, but he never built. He never did. He never had a function. He never had employees. He never had to create. Here's a better one. He never had to be responsible for the success of anything. Didn't work that way. All he had to do was go out and lie to the people in Baltimore Delaware rather, and where he represented, and everything went on. But the Trump administration didn't go to get people for his administration based upon what's fair. He didn't care about what was fair. He cared about getting the job done. So he chose people who knew how to get the job done. And that is why you had people like Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow and, all these other really successful men and women who came work for him. And that is why we had the strongest economy ever, practically, in the modern history of the United States.
Well, in the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Let's listen to another soundbite this week from Bob.
Look at these situations. They are not getting better. You talked about the airline just a moment ago. It's not getting better. We need to be aggressive. We have the capabilities. We have the willpower. Somebody just has to make the decision to go fix these problems, Brian. Inflation is going to get worse.
Now, what did I say earlier? Who's going to pay for this? We all are going to pay for it.
Absolutely.
We are paying for it.
Absolutely.
Because what all of this mess means is they're throwing dollars at it right now. We're going to work 24/7. All those union jobs are going to work 24/7. Imagine how much dollars they're going to throw at it. But it's not going to fix anything because the problem is much bigger than having some extra labor at a port. You don't have chassis. You don't have truck drivers. You got to reposition these containers that are sitting in the United States, all over the United States, that are empty.
Well, you
got to get them back to Asia.
And here's how we're going to pay for it. Just think about this. With inflation's what, 5.4%? Right, here you go. Car rentals up 42.9%. Gasoline up 43. This is in a year. 43.3%. Hotels up 19.8%. Pork, steak, or ribs, 19.2%. Eggs up 12.6%. You want to go into energy?
Well, Rich, well said. And thanks for getting those sound bites of Bob Nardelli, former CEO of Home Depot and Chrysler. Really, really, really enlightening. Hey, Rich, unfortunately, we're going to have to cut this right now, but we still got a lot more to talk about, folks. We're going to be back just in a moment. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, what happened in this last week with Southwest Airlines and all the flight cancellations? It's just like this stuff is just kind of like freaky. It just comes like out of nowhere, right? It's like we're talking about supply chain. I mean, supply chain worked very, very well for a long time. It wasn't like, you waited, so long and the shelves were empty and all of that stuff, right? It's like almost like, how did this happen? Is there a profit motive behind it? And it wasn't like all of a sudden the world started to consume. The world has always been consuming. And yes, there was a bit of a surge after COVID. People stayed home. Maybe they changed their purchasing habits a little bit. But to be as disruptive as what we're looking at right now, it just seems like this is way outsized, based on, all of a sudden, the supply chain doesn't work. This has been happening gradually over many years. And yes, maybe it should be somewhat challenged, but not nearly like it is. I think there's some bad players here. I think the steamship companies, the companies that move the containers from Asia to the United States or anywhere in the world, what are they doing? I don't trust those guys. They are really profiteering out of this. Typically, a container that I buy from somewhere in Asia to the United States, the East Coast of the United States, $4,000. Today, $24,000. And you still can't get it, and you're waiting for it to clear
and
the
it's still
ports.
offshore.
And then you call it the final mile. What the final mile is that, well, once it gets to the rail yard or it gets to the port in the United States, then you got to get it to the factory or the location that's consuming those
or the
goods.
distribution center.
Right. And then that costs has really super escalated. Now, I kind of understand that one because, we're paying people to stay at home in this country. We're paying people not to work. And people have just decided to stay at home and not work. And therefore, we're out of some of these basic services and people that we need to work in our economy, which, by the way, it's the best thing for them, too, to be productive. Everybody feels better about themselves. It's good for people to work and feel that they're accomplishing something. So we're not doing any favors by paying people to stay at home. But I just think that there's something potentially, and you're the conspiracy guy, but I think there's something potentially more sinister about this whole thing. And I'm a very optimistic guy. I typically don't believe in that. But anyway, I thought I just had to get that out.
Well, yeah, I do think there's something sinister about it. I think there's something sinister about everything I look at, because you can't be that stupid to run this country in the ground in 9 months the way it is. There are too many people who actually do have an IQ, and not everyone, in Washington, D.C. But to have a problem with energy, to have a problem with, as you say all the time, I say this all the time, to have the problem with the energy and the border and products and supply chain, in healthcare. I mean, everywhere you look, we're creating problems. And all I can remember is that when Obama wanted to pass Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, the Democrats came up with the idea and the mantra that it's healthcare is falling apart. Healthcare is falling apart. We have to do it now. We have to make it now. They created a disaster that they had to solve at 3 o'clock in the morning after they gave away half the country to get senators to sign on to it. But why don't we take a listen to that soundbite that we like
we
so
got
much.
an interesting soundbite here. Again, back to Southwest and all the airlines and all the cancellations, and imagine the disruption.
See what they have to say
to
pilots.
People's lives. Let's listen what the head of the airlines pilot Association said at Southwest Airlines this week.
If you have flights reduced by 30% because 30% of pilots are fired because they won't take the vaccine, this is going to affect how your goods get here from overseas, how they're distributed to the stores. The same thing's happening with the truckers. It's happening in the shipping industry. Those Amazon boxes that typically show up in 2 days, you might be looking at 3 weeks.
So that's interesting. Now, here we're hearing from someone very important, Southwest Airlines, how thousands of flights they have a day, how many people that move a day, how much commerce is conducted every day because of the things that are in these airplanes as they're flying around the country. So much commerce, so much trade, so many things that Americans depend on, in our airlines, providing a vital service, connecting the dot to the vaccine, saying, we're going to lose our workforce. Now, first of all, we have a labor shortage in this country, and now we're going to have all these people not working that we need so vitally because of a vaccine mandate.
You can take any economic in the country, whether it's going to be airlines, it's going to be shipping, it's going to be truck drivers, it's going to be healthcare, it's going to be publishing. It's across the board. You start eliminating people working at their jobs, you're eliminating a good part of the workforce in the United States. That has consequences.
And Rich, unfortunately, we're going to need to leave it there, but that is a great segue into our next show next week. So tune in again at Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.